We are so excited at Color of Success to be the first ones to see the book cover to the second book in the Clara Wu series, Clara Wu and the Jade Labyrinth, which could be purchased on Amazon.com. Clara Wu, along with Sung Kim, Yuka Satoh, and Daniel Nguyen, returned to ASEAN with guarded excitement. They learned more about the long history of ASEAN and the dark journey that the original Jade warriors had undertaken to save ASEAN against the Warlock armies. But now, that same journey needs to be embarked upon to save the Panda Kingdom. However, that means that the forbidden cave to the ominous Jade Labyrinth needs to be unsealed to reveal its secrets once more. So please support us and our author, Vincent Yee, in Clara Wu and the Jade Labyrinth. Welcome to the Color of Success podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie J. Wong. So today I have Vincent Yee, who was born in Boston, Massachusetts. For most of his career, he's worked for several Fortune 100 companies in various managerial roles. At all other times, he has a vision to write for better Asian representation. His first novel, The Purple Heart, is a story about love and courage set during the Japanese-American experience in World War II. His second book is a collection of 8 riveting contemporary Asian American short stories. His third book project, the Clarawoo books, is an epic young adult Asian American fantasy series consisting of 5 books that will be all launched within 1 year. Vincent Yee was a former national president for the National Association of Asian American Professionals. He's also been known to create artistic culinary dishes for friends, which when I visit Massachusetts, he will do for me. And when he is not writing, he may be binging a K-drama on Netflix, a man of my heart. So he now lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Hi, Vincent. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. It is such a pleasure to be here, and a belated congratulations to your Golden Crane Award.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I'm glad you're able to be a part of our journey and our history. Like I said, I wore my Clara Wu outfit, which we'll get into. It's a panda with my jade and all that. So super excited to get into this.
Awesome.
So let's jump right in. How did you develop these characters and come up with the Clara Wu series?
So what's interesting from a writer perspective is I don't set out to say I'm going to write a mystery per se. I just have these visions in my head. And after I developed the Purple Heart and the Tamago Stories, even though I got all these stories out, and it's my only way to free up memory space in my head, okay? But I had this fantasy story in my head for many years, and it just bounced around my head. I saw these scenes, and the scenes started to progress, and they started to form a timeline. And then when I could see something coherent, I said, I've got a fantasy story. I've got a story. And originally I thought, okay, it's gonna be a trilogy. And then when I started working on the outline, it came out to 5 stories. And I just said to myself, I just made more work for myself. Working on one novel is already huge, but then to work on 5 stories is just huge. And as you mentioned earlier, my goal is to actually launch all 5 within a year.
That is so ambitious, and I know that you can do it. So tell me a little bit more though, because I had the honor of being able to read it early. And yes, that's why, I'm just so excited that you're here. And you have the cover in the background, and as mentioned in your bio, Asian American representation. How did all these stories and inspiration pop in your head where you had to get them out in these 5 books?
Definitely. And the whole thing is this, because the story's been bouncing in my head for so long, and I used the lockdown. So the lockdown for the pandemic occurred for everyone. And for me, so I had parted ways from my last employer in second half of 2020. And I said, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I said, you know what? I'm going to try to attempt to write what I thought was a trilogy. And so I started to write that out. And as I started to write the outline, the characters really started to come to life. Just to share with you, the name Clara Wu wasn't even her original name. I had to work through a few names to finally come up with Clara Wu, and I do think it's a really nice name. So I had a vision for her, but I really wanted it to be a young adult Asian American fantasy because that's a genre that we're just not in very much. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to write a book for young adult Asian Americans and children as well, to basically so that they can grow up with it and see heroes. I wanted Asian Americans to read about themselves as heroes. And that's why I wanted to write this fantasy. So Clara Wu came to mind, and I knew I wanted it to be a pan-Asian American fantasy. There are a lot of those stories out there that's usually focused on one ethnicity, whether it's Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, and that's all fine.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to try to attempt to write something that included more than one. So that's why you have Clara Wu, Sung Kim, Yuka, Satoh, and Nguyen.
I love it, because that was one draw of the story for me, because not only did you have the different Asian American ethnicities, you also incorporated the food in there, the language. And I really, again, resonated with Sung because I've taken Korean for so long, even though I'm Chinese and have Clara's outfit on. I definitely loved that you had those elements, and it's almost like the characters were teaching each other little nuances about their culture when they came together.
Definitely. And like you mentioned, food is such an important thing in our Asian culture. So I want to present that and in many ways normalize it as our foods and what have you. So that's one of the reasons why I want to put food in there, because we could always connect with food.
Mm-hmm. And Clara's mom is the dumpling master. And I think that's, it was very clear early on that that's a comfort for her.
Definitely.
So part of Asian representation in media, in books, etc., is really to combat this idea of otherness. But how do you think we can continue to progress and give voice and faces to, these stories?
Yeah, so I agree. I think the whole entire concept of exclusion, and then hence you being othered per se, is that when you're excluded from stories and you don't see yourselves, you actually then become invisible, and you start to internalize that. And in my opinion, especially with all the anti-Asian hate that started to go around in 2021 especially, we needed to bring stories to life so that we can see ourselves as heroes overcoming these adversity and challenges. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book, especially for the young adults, because those are such formative ages, right? We all remember our teenage years when we were awkward or sometimes it may not awkward, but we could be awesome as well. But we want to reconcile all that. And we grew up with those years, and I wanted to make sure that I had a series, in this case, a young adult Asian American fantasy series, that young adults and children can grow up with and see themselves at an early age as heroes.
Yeah, and I'm not going to spoil who, but there's definitely two people that I ship in the book, and I'm hoping that relationship blossoms in that awkward teenage phase. And I'm sure, we're thinking the same because we love K-dramas, but I definitely agree. It's like these little subtleties of, being a teenager, finding yourself. And I mean, adults are still doing that, but just this very wonderful world of Asin and figuring out how they can become strong and warriors and so forth. So tell me a little bit more, without spoiling too much for the audience, about the concept of the book and what you're hoping to convey in this first book.
Definitely. So I think the concept of the book was, I mentioned earlier, to bring together an Asian American ensemble representing different Asian ethnicities, and the regular theme, battling good versus evil, right? And so these four, they're paired with their guardian animals, and you see them on the cover of the book. And I wanted to pair them with an element from their culture. So Sung Kim, he's got Yongganon, which is the guardian tiger, the white tiger. And you have the red crown crane, which is Japanese, associated with Yuka. And then you also have the water buffalo, associated with Nguyen. And of course, you have the panda, because who doesn't love a panda?
Yeah.
And I wanted a literary element in this case to connect the culture to the characters in such a different way. And I think that's what it is. I wanted to do a different angle on this fantasy to incorporate our cultures, but in a very, how should I say, immersive, epic Asian American fantasy. And I hope I did that.
Oh, absolutely. The Guardians play a really important role in kind of guiding these teenagers, these warriors, to kind of develop themselves. How did you come up with the personification of the Guardians? Because they can talk.
They can talk, definitely. So I knew that I wanted to have the gardening animals. At first, I knew the panda was going to be a default. I had to do research. So that's another thing. I had to do a lot of research in this book. I had to delve into all the Asian folklore with regards to the Asian ethnicities. I had to find the right animals to associate with the characters per se. And then, I had to think about the personalities of each of the characters as well. So had the animals, but also had the whole kingdoms as well, which was really cool. Creating these, the great thing about fantasy is you can create this majestic, amazing world that no one's ever seen before. And I think there are a lot of elements in the kingdoms of in the fantasy that no one has ever even conceived of. And I think that's what's going to make it bright and fresh for readers. And then all that comes together because I think, for example, is, there are a lot of, how should we say, Chinese Americans who may not like Chinese school, but if Chinese school was taught by a panda, they may give it a second chance.
Yeah, that would be super interesting. Yeah, or, having a different guardian teach you in any of your, Asian languages would be fantastic for children.
Definitely, yes.
So, as an Asian American author, I'm sure you faced some challenges, and I guess I'm wondering if you can speak to those and how that may have impacted your mental health.
Sure. I'll speak to my first book, so The Purple Heart. And when I wanted to write the novel, at that time, I never attempted to write a novel. I've always been good at creative writing, but writing a novel is a entirely different project. The timeline, the intricacies, there are character development, and
the discipline, really.
Yes, definitely. So when I came up with the idea, I wanted a very, how should we say, a very American theme. So I was thinking about World War II. And so I started to delve into World War II and said, so what Asian American issues happened in World War II? Well, the internment. 120,000 Japanese Americans were interned just because they were Japanese, and 2/3 of them were American citizens.
Right.
But then the whole thing is, I did a little more research and found out about the 442nd. And they were the Japanese regiment that volunteered to fight in World War II, despite their parents, their brothers and sisters and girlfriends being imprisoned on these internment camps. And if that's not a story of patriotism, then I don't know what is. And so I wanted to use the power of fiction to bring that lost chapter to life. So I had wrote this in 2004. So the first manuscript of The Purple Heart came out in 2004. At that time, I was trying to submit them to literary agents. And, most authors, a lot of rejection letters. And I did have a chance to speak to some literary agents and some editors. And, unfortunately, some of the candid comments were, Vincent, this is not a story that America wants to bring up again, because it is such a taint, a stain on American history. But it's a story that needs to be told, in my opinion. And so after that time, when I couldn't get a literary agent, it sat on the shelf for a long time. I didn't think I could get it published until Amazon changed the whole entire publishing industry with the Kindle. And once that was made possible, I said, now I can get the story out. So I committed myself to make that story and publish it, get it into a nice 6x9 format, glossy cover, and finally get the story out there. And I spent a year marketing it. And I think one of the greatest things was I actually got to meet people in the 442, the 442nd.
Wow.
So Dr. Seuss Ito, who was here in Wellesley, Massachusetts, and Herbert Yamamura in Hawaii. I flew out all the way to Hawaii to meet this man because somehow he got my book and somehow we reached each other. And so I said, let's meet. And it was great just to meet them, to hear their stories. And, the thing about Dr. Seuss Ito, he found Europe, the 442nd, and when I remember that day in his living room, and he put his hand on my hand and he said, Vincent, when I read the war stories, it was as if you were there with me. And that just touches my heart as an author, to be able to use my imagination and to write in such a way that is so cathartic that they can feel it. And he really felt that it was great that it was written. So
how special.
Yeah, it was. So that was that. And then the other thing also is, there are a lot of Asian American authors out there, and it's great, but we need more. The whole question comes down to is, can you find the right literary agent? So when I started to market or try to find a literary agent for the Clarawoo books, well, you first start with young adult, and you go down fantasy, And you go down to those literary agents who are open to POC.
Yeah.
And then it comes down to this number, and it's not a big number. So I want more literary agents to be open-minded to Asian American fantasy. And I think that's one of the barriers, just very similar to Hollywood, is getting our stories on the big picture, getting our stories published in the publishing houses by publishers like HarperCollins or Penguin and what have you.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, like you said, in the literary business, rejection is kind of a given, but in addition, people of color, minorities, et cetera, in all different aspects, struggle with that. And so how do you mentally prepare yourself or at least rebound from those rejection letters?
I rebound by publishing 5 books in 1 year.
That's your therapy.
Yes, because you know what it is we need to get them out there. That's what it is. If I can't get the help to get the story out, then I'm just going to get it out there myself and hopefully find the readers, because from what all the 9-year-olds have told me, they love the book. And my first review actually came from a 9-year-old, I believe, from New York.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yes. And it was great. I mean, the fact that he compared it to Harry Potter was so warming and so inspiring, which is great. And he's probably going to get book 2 in less than a week.
Well, like I said, I think even now, as I imagine the characters, as I was reading it, it's like we need to get someone to get these movie rights involved, and like seriously, maybe submitting it for yourself to, one of the fellowship programs or whatever. But at any rate, I think it does take some mental fortitude to be able to have the confidence to say, you know what, I'm just going to put these 5 books out there and continue to self-promote. I mean, how do you combat the exhaustion? Because I've been on the end of like creator burnout, and I've still been working on my book for like 2 years. Not a fantasy novel. It's actually funny stories from throughout my life as a mompreneur and so forth. But how do you maintain that discipline and not and deal with the exhaustion and burnout?
So the creative process is a very solitary experience.
Yes.
You're writing, during this whole entire 5-book series, it was the first time where I finally bought one of those like wrist cushion for keypad.
I can't get carpal tunnel.
Exactly. It was my first time actually experiencing calluses on my wrists. It's like, oh my God, because I was just literally pounding out on my keyboard night and day. But what I do, my therapy is in between each finished first draft, I binge a K-drama.
Which one did you recently binge?
So I recently just binged Silent Sea.
Okay, I haven't seen it yet. I'm finishing Snowdrop, which obviously we could talk offline. It has like a lot of controversy, but my husband's a Blink, so and Jisoo does an amazing job, so I'm like happy for her. But I think that's a great thing. What is it about K-dramas that calm you?
I think the great thing about K-drama when they came out, especially for an Asian American, I finally got to see people who look like me doing normal, everyday, and amazing things because of K-drama. And that's what it was. It wasn't we were a token actor per se. It was basically people who looked like me, even though they were Korean, but in an everyday situation, and just going through life and doing their things as a K-drama would tell you. And that was what was so cool. And I think to that point is, especially on TV today in media, especially in America, someone who's white, they unconsciously every single day see themselves on TV, and they don't even know it. They unconsciously see a positive reinforcement of themselves. And a quick story. So in 2018, in August, a friend texted me, and she said that she had saw the Crazy Rich Asians poster on a bus stop, I believe. There's the iconic poster with Constance Wu and Amy Golden. And she said to me, "Is this how white people see themselves every single day?"
Yeah.
And yeah, it is. And as Asian Americans, we don't see ourselves, hence we get excluded, we become othered, and we actually sometimes internalize racism or internalize ourselves, and we become invisible. And then we don't want to be ourselves anymore. So K-drama was great.
And I definitely agree with that, because there's love, there's careers, there's backstabbing, there's bullying, but with Asian faces. So, I mean, it's all there. And I think people really resonate with them. one of the things too is that there's a 12 to 16 show, and shows, and that it ends. That's what I love about it, because in American TV, it's like, we're going to keep putting this story out until like we get canceled, or they cancel it before they finish the story, right? And so
it's so frustrating.
I know. So I think that's another draw of it. But you know, the heroes in your story, coming back to this, you know, the main character, because there's 4, but the main character, Clara, Asian American, female, badass with, you know, a bow and special jade arrows. So how did you decide that it would be a female Asian American to lead this group of teenagers and stand kind of from her perspective a lot of the times?
Yep, no, so good question. You know, the whole thing is with the Clara Wu books, the whole Clara Wu series is, in my mind, it was always an Asian American female. So it wasn't that I set out to say, oh, well, who should I make the main character? But the visions in my head was always an Asian American female with 3 strong Asian American characters to support her as well. And they are equally, as you read through the books, they're equally as strong, but Clara Wu in this case is from her perspective, and she is the main character. So as simple as that, it's no different than, say, the Harry Potter books. You know, RJ, when she wrote it, it was going to be a male character. So same thing with the Clara Wu is, in this case, it just happened to be in my head, an Asian American teenager who is female Chinese American.
Clara Wu is trying to figure out where she fits in terms of being in Chinese school and being a Chinese American and having people say nasty racial slurs to her, etc. So, you know, there are these aspects of these characters where you wouldn't necessarily expect them to be heroes, but there's a certain draw to them developing their leadership skills.
Yeah, and you will see that in book 2 and book 3, 4, and 5. They're going to do more amazing things. So
I can't wait. And so tell me more about what you view. Who do you view as a hero? What qualities or characteristics do they embody?
You know, I think as an Asian American male, and many Asian American males in America would probably agree, is Bruce Lee. You know, Bruce Lee is such an iconic man, hero. And even though it's from the 1960s, and I think, you know, when I mentioned 1960s, 1970s, right, it's so long ago, it's like 50 years ago, but he still resonates so much. And what his daughter does, Shannon Lee, to perpetuate and continue
his legacy.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, I watched Warrior, loved Warrior, it was awesome. But Bruce Lee is that hero. And, you know, as much as he still has such longevity, but we don't have any recent heroes. Now, yes, in the last year, so Shang-Chi, Simu Liu, hero, right? Daniel Day Kim, hero. But the whole thing is, up until then, there was no one. There was no really one big person that we could resonate with, especially for me as an Asian American male. You know, and it was because of him, I got into nunchucks and kung fu. So, and that was really a big part of my life from elementary school all the way through college, whereas the kung fu, I was always in Chinatown every single weekend, taking classes and teaching and what have you. But that's just such an impression that he left. But at the same time, even in the late 1960s and 1970s, he was fighting for Asian representation. And we are still doing that today. Yeah. So we're continuing that legacy. I'm glad that Warrior season 3 is going to start filming soon. So can't wait to see that. But he's still fighting for the same thing. We're still fighting for the same thing. Now we just got to bring more stories to the front.
Absolutely.
And I wear a Bruce Lee bracelet every single day.
That's amazing.
Every single day.
That reminds you to have strength, right?
Yes, yes.
So, you know, the other part is you've been in Fortune 100 companies. And so what have you learned about yourself being an Asian American male in those settings?
Interesting. So I always brought my Asian authentic self as much as I can to work. And so in that respect, people say, well, why are you so Asian? Well, I said, well, because I am Asian and we have to reflect our customers. And so I always try to bring an Asian aspect, especially in product marketing.
Can you give me an example? Like, how do you, because I really want people to hear this. How do you bring your authentic Asian self to work?
Yeah, so I'll give a few quick examples. So at the last company I worked with was an insurance company. And also they rolled out all these cool images on the website. Also you saw, brown people and what have you. But then I started to notice something. There were no Asian people at all, none. So there were white people, there were Black people, there were Hispanic, you can tell, but there were no Asian Americans. So I brought that up. So I found out who was in charge of the whole entire marketing campaign. And I said, why are there no Asian Americans? And so she actually then went to the illustrator, who was a white man. And it turned out he's never ever drawn an Asian American in his life. So he had no idea how to draw one. So in his mind, we were already invisible. So he was just writing or drawing what he knew. So that's one example. Another example that I did was presentations, right? We all do our PowerPoint presentations to groups and to show product, show a roadmap and what have you. And sometimes we insert images. Well, what I did was anytime when there was a chance, I inserted an Asian American into my images. That's representation, right? I wanted, my presentation is going to be seen by 10 or 100 people. I want them to see an Asian American, and why not? So, because they're a customer as well.
I love that. Those are such great ideas. And that's why the examples are so important because, authenticity is really important and being stressed at work now because people realize like now we're in our homes. Well, many of us are fortunate to work remotely and people have dogs barking and kids and different decorations. And it gives you more of an inside look into people's lives. So the line between personal and professional, it has become more and more blurred. And so bringing your authentic self to your work home is really, really important. And those are great suggestions. So in terms of the books, I know that you can buy them on Amazon. Right. Now, tell me a little bit more about the timeline for the releases and how people can purchase the books and get their hands on them. Definitely. So book 1 is right here, and it's got the green cover. I think you know why it's green, but we won't spoil it for everyone. Yes. It's all available through Amazon as a paperback and a Kindle. Book 2 is coming out in time for Lunar New Year. And that will probably be out within a week, God willing, and that the snowstorm and blizzard that we're about to get here in Boston does not cut out my internet or my laptop. And book 3 will come out in time for May, for APA month. Book 4 will come out in August. And book 5, hopefully in time for Black Friday of this year, November. So I would have pounded out all 5 within a year. Well, we definitely have to celebrate when we can all get together because that is just such an amazing, will be an amazing accomplishment. Even to put out one book is amazing, but just the lofty goal that you have, which you're going to do. I know it. Thank you. Thank you. And, and the whole thing is this, once the 5th book comes out, you can buy the collection and binge it. Oh, just like a K-drama. Yes, I love it. Yes, exactly. Well, one question that I've been asking all my guests recently is, what's one question that you wish someone would ask you, and what would your answer be? That's an interesting question. I'm not quite sure if I have an answer for that, because I get asked a lot of questions by friends, and there's been a lot of questions that's already been asked. So I don't have one at the moment. You kind of stumped me. That makes me happy too. So don't worry about it. Okay. If I do think of one, I may tell you later. So we shall see. Oh, that's great. Well, you know what? Actually, one question that some people have asked, and I do like it when they ask it, is what's next? So what is next? Yeah, what is next? If I can get this series to be commercially viable, and so that I can eat pizza and ramen and make sure I'm fed every single day, is potentially to work on a sequel for The Purple Heart. So I do have a sequel in my head for that. I potentially have about 6 more short stories in my head. And because I wrote the 5 books for the Clarawoo books, I do have a concept for volume 2. I won't, because it will be in the world of Azen, but I won't share, because I won't spoil anything, what that volume 2 could look like.
but I think it would be pretty amazing.
Well, the story is just developing amazingly. And again, I hope that we can get them into more classrooms and
Yes.
the more and more kids learn about them, that's where it really catches on. So I'm hoping that once my daughter becomes a word millionaire, which she's very, very close, that she can start to binge these books as well. Because the nice thing about having two Asian American little girls is that I have this power and responsibility to help them continue to develop and love themselves. And
Yes.
it's really a difficult concept to explain race and ethnicity and equity to a child, but I try every day. It's like when my daughter didn't really understand the concept of like, who's Asian shit? Like Hermione Granger is an Asian. I'm like, no, honey. And then we're like trying to explain it to her, and it's really hard. And usually the go-to answer is like, oh, people that look like us. But then when you don't see people that look like you on
Right.
screen, then that's difficult. Fortunately, they have it. They're in a different generation, right? So they're able to see Shang-Chi like 5 billion times. Or what was beautiful was, in Shang-Chi, when the mom was speaking in Chinese and one of my daughter's friends was reading the subtitles out loud. Like, I'm so glad people didn't get annoyed at her. We were all with friends. We rented out a movie theater. But just the fact that when the mom came on screen, she was like, she's beautiful. And it just warmed my heart so much because, she was wearing traditional Chinese cheongsam, and just that whole thing of like beauty standards are being shown to young children. It's amazing.
I agree. Did you catch all the Easter eggs in Shang-Chi?
Not all of them. I every time I watch it again, I catch more. And even with like Harry Potter, because we're big Potterheads, like you're like, I don't remember that, So there's, and of course they go on YouTube after they watch, we watched Encanto, and they're going on and just seeing the little ties between the siblings and all that. So yeah, we try to be diversity focused here. And even when they were babies, we would go to the library and I'd make sure that we had different authors on the bookshelf.
Oh, that's awesome to hear.
Yeah. So any kind of inspirational words or a message that you'd like to send to the audience?
I think the one thing I would say is to support independent Asian American writers. There are so many of us, and I've actually connected with quite a number, and they share the same struggles as I do, trying to get the stories out there. But there are so many of us trying to write for better Asian representation. And we just need your support and to give our stories a chance. And when I say our, it's not just the writers, but our community. And
Absolutely.
Give our community stories a chance, because like you said with Clara Wu, they can be amazing. They can be more amazing than any other story and take you to new lands, Asian-inspired lands that you've never seen before. And that's what I wanted to create with Clara Wu, the books, an immersive, epic Asian American fantasy that no one has ever seen before.
That's amazing. So also, how can people connect with you on your social or your website? Let us know.
Oh, definitely. So I have all the Clara Wu books domain names. So I've got them on Instagram, I've got them on Twitter, I've got them on TikTok. Now I have no TikTok content just yet, but that'll be coming soon. I've got the Clara Wu Books Facebook page as well, and the clarawubooks.com domain. So all that's coming together. I am a one-man show. Aside from all the writing, I'm also my own digital content creator. I'm also my own webmaster. I'm also my own marketing person. So I'm a one-man show, but that's how people can find it. If you do Clara Wu in Google, everything should come up.
Okay, I'll make sure that the SEO is working. Yeah, no, I totally empathize with you. When I started my private practice and even, Color of Success, it was that way for a long time. So, I mean, you have so much business experience too. And I'm like, maybe you could be that mini boutique company for Asian American writers. Who knows?
Yeah, potentially. You actually brought up a good point. I always believe in bringing people together. So during this whole entire journey, and that's how we met, because I posted on Asian Hustle Network, and I'm hoping to be on their podcast one day as well. Mm-hmm. But so I was on there. That's how I met you. But I met a few number of Asian American authors, writers reached out to me. So finally, because I will have some downtime once book 2 comes out, we're actually going to meet on Zoom for the first time and just bring ourselves together, kind of give ourselves some support to continue to advocate for ourselves and get people to continue to write their stories, and we'll go from there.
Well, you're such an inspiration, and the Clara Wu series is such an inspiration. So, I'm going to say fighting, and, there's so much more in store for this series and beyond, because you're already touching people's lives. And just remember that, even that one review or the 2 reviews, and as they grow, they mean so much.
Yeah. And I'm changing fashion as well, as you're wearing a panda outfit.
I know. It's like, come on, you're making an impact on pop culture right now. So
that would be really cool, and so cool, especially when Clara Wu can do that. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, have a little panda and have people post pictures with different pandas around the world. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, there have actually been a few pictures submitted to me with the book and their panda, and they range from ages from 9 to 40.
That's awesome. Well, Vincent, thank you so much for joining me today. You're such a pleasure to meet, and I'm just so happy that we were able to connect today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And before we go, can you do one thing with me?
Absolutely.
Because now that you've read book 1, remember when this move here? So if you bring your fists up, we'll just quickly bow and say, for Aizen.
For Aizen.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to the Color Success Podcast. Listen, like, subscribe on all major streaming platforms, YouTube, IG, and if you want exclusive content, you can join our Patreon. All links can be found at colorofsuccesspodcast.com.